The White House released a statement about canceling this meeting, and they said in part, given the lack of progress, we have informed the Russian government that we believe it would be more constructive to postpone the summit until we have more results from our shared agenda. My initial thought in reading that was, do they actually have a shared agenda, Russia and the U.S.?
They do more than you'd think, because they're in competition so much more than they seem to be cooperating. There's a shared agenda, particularly on containing kind of Islamist extremism, which runs through the southern Caucasus in Russia as well. There's big economic interests, particularly on Russia's side. That's one of the main reasons they need the United States. Syria is an issue that we would like more of their help on,
right,
as well as Iran, that they have concerns over. So there are shared interests.
Okay.
There's just very little progress being made over in recent months on any of them, apparently.
And how bad is this moment when the president says, no way, I'm not meeting with you, essentially a very high-level diplomatic snub?
It is exactly that, and Putin cares about pomp and circumstance surrounding an American president's visit. It gives him prestige. This is after several months when he's come under fierce criticism for his policies in Syria, supporting President Assad there, for the sweeping anti-gay laws that he has signed and championed, more trials of dissidents, sort of an abysmal human rights record in recent months.
Yeah.
Not to mention the recent snub, obviously, that they showed the president over Edward Snowden, not returning him, which was kind of a last straw.
Yeah, and so what has the reaction been on both sides of the aisle, Americans, Republicans, Democrats, and in Russia? We've heard Russia say, for instance, that they don't think this is a good reason for the snub. What's your sense of people's reaction?
I think here in Washington, there's some rare unanimity around the fact that it really was not very possible to go. And as an administration official described to me this morning, a summit is supposed to showcase a relationship.
Yeah.
And you can't showcase a relationship that is not working.
Right, right.
And so there's been unanimity here, really, on the decision. Russia, they're trying to make it about Snowden. It's not just about Snowden. It's about a whole series of issues.
And so can Obama check off what he wants to check off on his to-do list without Putin?
Very difficult. I mean, first and foremost, because Russia is obviously a veto-wielding member of on the Security Council.
Yeah.
So sanctions against Iran, sanctions against Syria, military action against Syria all really come through the Security Council in the way Obama sees the world and wants it done. And Russia's there with a veto. So on a very simple basis, yes, they need Russia to work through a lot of those issues.
Talking to the Post Scott Wilson about Russia and the U.S., what's your sense of where we are in their relationship right now? I know you've observed them, maybe even up close at some of these summits they've had and traveling with the president. And we see the picture back here. Neither of them look too pleased. What do you make of their relationship?
It's as awkward a relationship as there is out there right now for the president. And most recently, I saw them at the G8 summit in Northern Ireland when there was this very awkward exchange, the president trying to make a joke about Vladimir Putin's martial arts and Putin not liking it at all.
He's like, no, I see you making a joke.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, look, this is a former law lecturer at the University of Chicago and a former head of the KGB. And a senior KGB official.
Who likes to do all sorts of things like wrestle bears.
Exactly, ride horseback with his shirt off and all kinds of things. They're very different people. And again, look at it from the trajectory of beginning with the so-called Russian reset. That was with a different president, Medvedev, but Putin was his prime minister, and Putin basically endorsed his candidacy for president. That was a different time. There had been some progress made under Medvedev, particularly on arms control. And now this really is an acknowledgement that the reset is not working.
Right. And so where does this put Obama in terms of how world leaders perceive him, in terms of how we perceive him here? Some people say he's weak, some people say he's strong. Where does this put him?
Practically speaking, one criticism you hear a lot from talking with diplomats and officials from other countries is that there isn't a consequence often for going against Obama. I heard this quite a bit writing about the Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations he was trying to put together. Both sides would defy him and there'd be no consequence. This is a consequence. Is it a major consequence? No, it's not. But as you said, it's a high-profile snub, and maybe it'll send the signal that there are consequences to these choices.
And so what could happen to make this thing go away and make the meeting actually happen? Is it just a matter of Snowden? What's your sense?
I think it will not happen now because of, not just because of Snowden. Even if they return Snowden tomorrow, I think that there's just too many other issues. There's trade tariffs after we helped Russia get into the World Trade Organization last year. They're putting tariffs on certain things they're not supposed to, U.S. goods. Small things like, seemingly small things like that, to big things like no progress on missile defense talks, that is very important to the president.
Right.
Another arms control round, important to the president. Really no engagement since Tom Donilon, then the National Security Advisor, went and visited in April. So I think it's really much broader than just Snowden. Really seems to me that that was a kind of a high-profile last straw.
And there will be talks, Hagel and Kerry meeting with some lower-level Russian officials. What do we think is going to happen with those talks?
They'll meet Friday with their counterparts. The idea really is to pick up the pieces and say, here's where we are. We're not coming to Moscow. We don't want to walk away from this relationship. There's too much to do. How do we go forward with it?
Is this the Cold War all over again, or is that just a cliche to say that?
I don't think it is, to the degree that there's not sort of this international rivalry through proxies all over the world that there used to be. It's certainly cold in their relationship. And Russia certainly seems to still see us very much as a competitor, a rival, much like they do China, in which we could probably help them with. And it's part of Putin's makeup. It's part of the way he sees the world.
And in some ways, Obama, you said it's a cold relationship, and that's been a criticism of Obama, just in terms of his approach to things, that he's more cerebral rather than being warm. What do you make of that? Is that a fair criticism in the context of this relationship?
I think it's not quite so fair in this relationship, because he did have a better one with Medvedev, who was a lawyer, who talked about political reform, who was sort of a person much more of Obama's kind of view of the world than Putin is. And so there is a relationship problem that the president has had and continues to have in some areas, but Putin's a pretty tough nut to crack. It's hard to know how you'd approach him, and telling jokes about his martial arts isn't funny.
Right, if that's not charming.
It's just not working out.
Yeah, it's not going to work. Scott, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. Thanks so much. You can follow Scott on Post Scott Wilson. I know you're tweeting up a storm these days, aren't you? All right. And now we want to turn to the debate over minimum wage. Thousands of fast food workers across the country are fighting for higher wages. They want a minimum wage of $15 an hour. That's nearly twice the current minimum wage. One of those workers who's joining me today is Devonte Yates. He is joining me from Milwaukee. Devonte, thank you so much for being here.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. I want to just kind of start with where you are now in your life and how you landed a job where you're working at McDonald's. How did you end up here?
I ended up at McDonald's. Basically, the previous job I had, things weren't working out, so I left. McDonald's was one of the first jobs to call me back. It is a minimum wage job, but it is a job that I need to be able to, pay my bills and to get through life.
Yeah. And if you could take me back a little bit, when you were 15, 16, you're a high school student, where did you think your life would be? You're 21 now. Where did you think you would be when you were younger in high school, in terms of a career and a life?
Honestly, I thought that I would be working, in an entry-level field because I am in school for criminal justice right now. Next semester will be my last semester. So as far as that, I'm pretty much where I want to be. But as far as working, I never thought I'd be working in fast food. Right.
And tell me a little bit about your life now. You said you're in school. You're trying to get a degree there. What's sort of your work-life balance, if you will?
Well, I go to school mornings. I work nights. Basically, working and going to school, I really don't have too much of a life. Right. To be honest, it's just work, school, work, school, work, school.
And I'm sure you've seen McDonald's put out a budget, and it essentially assumes that you would have a second job here. Have you looked at this McDonald's budget and figured out if it makes sense for you?
I have looked at the budget and I have, sat down and, did the budget according to my life.
Right,
For me, I think that it really doesn't help because the budget assumes that you hold a second job.
right.
And for the McDonald's that I work at and just McDonald's in general, the way that they schedule you, it's so sporadic that it's almost impossible to hold and maintain a second job.
Yeah,
And if you do, if McDonald's does find out that you have a second job, it's pretty much you need to quit that job because they want you there all the time. They want you on call.
uh-huh.
So the
It-
budget really doesn't add up.
How does it, so it says here that your income from your first job would be 1105. What exactly do you make from McDonald's per month?
Per month, all of my checks will probably add up to about $450.
$450.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I imagine you have all sorts of bills, not only with school, but in feeding and clothing yourself. Why do you think,
Right.
why do you think you should make more than $725 for a part-time job at McDonald's?
Well, I think we should make more than 725 because working in fast food, you go to work every day. You're tired because you're working numerous hours. You're on call. When you go to work, there's all sorts of risks, getting burned by grease. There's the mental part of getting cussed out by customers for something that's beyond your control.
Right.
Getting treated unfairly by your bosses and your upper management. Fast food workers, we go through a lot, and
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like it on the outside looking in, but there's a lot of things that we deal with as far as management and as far as how the workday goes.
Yeah, you've laid out a litany of sort of complaints and hazards in terms of workaday life at McDonald's and in fast food. Why don't you get a different job? Why don't you get a higher paying job?
Because fast food and retail are pretty much the only jobs that are hiring at this point in time.
Yeah.
It's not like me or other fast food retail workers don't go looking for better jobs.
Yeah.
It's just that fast food and retail are the quickest to call you and be like, hey, come work for us, and we can't not work because we need some source of income to be able to live.
Yeah. So now here you are. You're at McDonald's. You make $7.25 an hour, about $400 a month. Where do you want to do next with your life? If you could have anything 2, 3, 4 years from now in terms of a life and a career, what would it look like?
3, 4 years from now, I want to have my degree in criminal justice. I want to go into parole and probation. I'm going, 3 or 4 years down the line, if this campaign is still going, even, if I do have a better paying job, I am still going to continue to fight because this doesn't just apply to me. It applies to future generations after me. It's a time where we don't want our kids or, generations after us to struggle like we are now. Like, times are hard. So, my future consists of me helping the future.
Devontae, thank you so much for sharing your story today. Good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
care.
you so much.
So that was Devontae. He was telling us about how difficult it is to live on a minimum wage salary. The organization Low Pay Is Not Okay also takes issue with the McDonald's wage. Take a look. For more on fast food workers and minimum wage, I am joined by William Spriggs. He's a professor at Howard University, and Ed Butowski, managing partner at Chapwood Capital Investment Management. Guys, thank you so much for being with me today. I want to first get your reaction. Bill, and I'll go to you since you are here in front of me, and Ed, then I'll go to you. What's your reaction to the McDonald's budget? It essentially assumes that workers have a second job, that they spend like $20 on health care. What's your sense of what McDonald's is trying to do?
Well, once again, we see this great divide because of the huge inequality we have. So managers at McDonald's, those in the C-suite, probably make as much as a minimum wage worker would make all year. They probably do that before they go to lunch. So just as some of us have a hard time imagining what does it mean to be a millionaire, they have a hard time understanding the life of a regular worker. $10, $9 an hour, all of that is very abstract to them.
Right.
They probably put out the budget thinking they were being helpful and putting a kind face on what they did, but because they're so disconnected from America's workforce, I don't think they get it. They don't get what the current labor market looks like. Obviously, it has changed. This is no longer a part-time job. They require their workers to be on call. And so the workers really have a very difficult time, as you heard from the worker in Milwaukee, and having a second job. And when you look at the workforce today, it's so different. In 1979, if you look at those who made less than $10
Right.
an hour, that's like 40% of the workforce would have been teenagers.
Yeah.
Today, they're a fraction. They're just like 12%.
Yeah.
When you look at educational attainment, about 49% would have had less than high school because many of them would have been teenagers completing high
Yeah.
school. You just heard from a worker completing college.
He's
Now
21, yeah.
now you got 40% who have some college or have a college degree who are making less than $10 an hour.
Ed, I'm going to have you jump in here. What do you think of McDonald's budget and just the situation more generally that Devontae described? Here's a guy who's 21. He seems to want better things for his life. He's making $7.25 an hour, wants to make 15. What's your sense of this? And I know a lot of folks have a different idea about what these workers should be making.
Well, first of all, I mean, the free market is what the free market is. I mean, we need to make sure that we don't misunderstand that there is a free market out there, and that price will be determined based on supply and demand. So that's first and foremost. But Devontae is exactly what this country is about. He's a good man. You can tell he's out there getting an education. He's out there trying to improve, and he took a job that fits in his lifestyle as best as he can, because it is hard to find work out there. The idea that you keep talking about McDonald's. It's not just McDonald's. The bigger problem here, and I'm sure that the professor will agree to this, is that the cost of living continues to go up at such a rate that wages don't keep up with that. I mean, I created my own index to amplify this point, because most people just don't understand that your cost of living increase year over year goes up about 3 times more than the government CPI. But the wages in the public sector and the private sector are tied to that. So it is almost impossible for anyone to live, even if they're working full time, working at McDonald's in most metropolitan areas. He lives in Milwaukee.
Right.
The cost of living increase in Milwaukee for the last 12 months is about 11% when you include taxes, insurance, food, health care, everything together. If you were to compare it to 12 months ago, it's about 11%, but his cost of living increase went up about 2%. So he fell 9% behind.
Right.
So it's not a McDonald's thing. The problem is much, much bigger than that. It's not a matter of, okay, McDonald's pays 7, they should pay 15. Well, you know what? McDonald's is a private, it's a public company, but
Yeah.
it's not part of the government. They can pay what they want to pay, and if people don't show up, guess what? That's going to force them to increase their wages. It's going to hurt their shareholders, but that's how you make changes.
Right. Bill, I want to bring you in here. Ed talking there about wage stagnation and the attendant explosion in terms of the cost of living just going up. What do you make of that disconnect and the causes of it?
Well, there are 2 things. One is we haven't increased the minimum wage. We set it in nominal terms, not in real terms. The president has proposed that we index it to prices so that it will adjust to that. And so right now at $7.25, it's fallen back to a real value below the level when Ronald Reagan took office, way below where it was when I took my first minimum wage job back in the 1970s.
What were you making?
I made $1.75.
Oh,
That was in
wow.
nominal terms, but in real terms, that's closer to like $10.50 an hour.
Okay.
So in real terms, I was better off. The other way of looking at it, I mean, we talk about the market, but we prescribe the market. The market can operate and it can be competitive, but we have always set limits. And we set limits by setting the minimum wage. That was one of the victories of the New Deal and the Fair Labor Standards Act. We're celebrating 75 years of it
Yep.
right now. And the idea was to set a floor from which competition would take place. And over
Right.
time, up until the 1980s, if you look at when Congress took actions to raise it, they always set the minimum wage close to half the average wage, which also happened to be pretty close to the poverty level wage, so that
Okay.
anyone who found a job would be guaranteed at least I'm poor.
Yeah, yeah.
And from a policy perspective, it meant all you had to do was figure out how to get people jobs.
Right, right.
Now, that isn't the answer. We have over
Yep.
70 occupations where the median wage is below $10 an hour. Most of those are female-dominated jobs. This goes beyond McDonald's. This is
Goes-
child care workers, personal care
Yeah,
workers,
home
those who
health aid.
take care of the elderly and of children.
Ed, I want to bring you in
Yeah.
here. Current minimum wage is $7.25. Obama wants it to be $9. Devontae there wants it to be 15, and we're sort of using McDonald's as a catch-all for these
Sure.
low-wage worker jobs. What would it hurt the bottom line of these companies or corporations to raise it to $9 or $12? I know here in DC, for instance, there's a fight over Walmart and folks wanting them to have a minimum wage that's a living wage. It's $12 an hour. What would it hurt a company
Yeah.
like Walmart or McDonald's to do that?
Well, look, I mean, it completely depends. I mean, then you got to ask yourself the question: what would it hurt a company if people didn't show up to work? I mean,
Right.
I'm not a fan of unions, but I am a fan of people who work their butts off and being able to have a chance to continue to grow. And the one thing, and you know, it's something that I am going to really make a big, you know, to do about as the years go on, is that the cost of living increase as measured by the CPI and is it Professor Spriggs? I think I
Yes.
said that right. You know, I usually don't agree with most people that I'm on with, but I agree with you. Right?
We've found some
And-
agreement here.
Yeah, and I agree with you that you cannot live with this, but I like to have it set by the free market. But you know what? You're right. You earned $1.75 when you were younger, and that's the equivalent of about $13. People need to study that $7.25 or $7.50 today is significantly less than the purchasing power of that, significantly less than when it was set.
Yeah.
We need to adjust this minimum wage based on that if we are going to have a floor for a minimum wage, because right now
Can
we're
you
just
imagine
lying
a
to ourselves.
situation where corporations, I mean, I think McDonald's makes about $1 billion per quarter. Their sales are
Right.
kind of flat because folks are wanting to eat, from different places. And so, I mean, can you imagine a situation where a corporation would get out front on this?
Well, here's the thing. A corporation, what they're not going to do is raise their hand and say, "Hey, I want to make it so," and they should in
Yeah.
some cases. But you know, they're not going to, because they report to their shareholders
Yeah.
and their goal. Every CEO walks in and talks about earnings. They don't talk about, you know, anything. You know, they get to other things, but earnings are what is their scorecard. You look at the Washington Nationals. They don't show up and say, "You know what? Let's just make sure everyone gets to play." Their game is to win, and
Yeah.
winning in the corporate world is increasing your earnings.
Yeah.
And but on the other side, you know what? We got to do something about this, because it's a disaster that people have to live that way.
Ed, thanks. I'm going to go to Bill for a last comment here. Is protesting the way to go on this? I mean, it seems to me protests work very well. Civil rights movement, these sort of walkouts and mass protests, is this the way to make a change?
Workers have the right to organize, and they need to exercise the right to organize. I mean, the bigger problem we have, as well as the minimum wage, is that we don't have unions putting in their voice on what the wages ought to be. It's not just the disconnect between wages and inflation. There's the bigger disconnect between wages and productivity. And American workers continue to become more productive. McDonald's workers, when I was growing up, didn't do the job that McDonald's workers do today.
Did you work at McDonald's?
No, I worked at,
What did you
I was
do?
a retailer at Sears.
Okay.
But those workers today are far more productive. They do instant inventory. They are in charge of making sure that the machines work.
Yeah.
They do a lot more than simply serve the food, and their productivity has gone up as well. And so the wage
And their
has
productivity is helping McDonald's be more productive and make more
and,
money.
and it's the gap that keeps the economy from working well.
Yeah.
If more people had more pay, then
Ed, what was that?
If-
Was that a
if-
primal scream?
if we had more workers paid better, McDonald's sales would be higher. And that's the other side of this equation. The
You
gap
pay people more, they spend more,
More.
they buy more dollar hamburgers or
exactly.
something. Ed, is that right or no?
And
Yeah,
low-wage
get rid of
workers tend to
unions,
be
then-
their customer.
Ed, you're just, you say no unions and what else?
Look, I understand people have a right to organize. This can be addressed in the free market, not by collecting and having unions. But that's a whole nother story. And
Right.
I'd like to come to Howard University and debate you on that one.
Oh, we got an invitation here. Is
Yeah.
this going to be like a beer summit of some sort?
Yeah.
I don't see a beer summit, but I'm happy to debate this topic because the gap between productivity and wages created the problem that we're in right now.
Yeah.
It's the difference between what we make and what we take home, and having that go to profits is not the way to
Ed
keep
is
the economy
agreeing with
fueled.
you there.
But it's a free market. It's a free market. That's the
Yeah.
thing. We're not living in a kibbutz. It's the free market. So their job is to make what they can. But I agree. There's a problem. We've got to solve it. But it's not McDonald's job to solve that problem.
Nothing in the minimum wage prevents competition.
Yeah.
It just sets parameters for competition.
No,
Okay,
I agree.
we-
I
And
think we gotta
so we know that there have to be parameters. We set
Okay.
parameters in many different ways in the economy.
I agree.
That's
Guys,
an important parameter.
Ed, you're going to have to
Just
come
no
down to
union.
Howard, or you're going to go up to New York. But guys, thanks for chatting with me today. Good luck.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And now it's time for our kitchen sink. Detroit, the city that brought us Motown and our great car culture, is in the fight of its life, and we should all be paying attention to what's going on in this once vibrant city that is now trying to figure out a viable way ahead. There's plenty of blame to go around for where things stand now. Ineffective politicians, unrealistic pensions, residents moving out in droves. The numbers, they tell the story. 1.8 million people lived and worked in Detroit in the 1950s. Now that's down to 700,000. And the city is $18 billion in the red. Detroit now has a choice to make in the race for mayor. They've erred before in picking people who were seen as saviors, but not up for the job. Kwame Kilpatrick, he comes to mind. The city will now choose between a former hospital executive and a sheriff as their next mayor. Ultimately, it might not matter who wins, but we should all pay attention to the road ahead for Detroit and for what this means for all of our cities. The state of that city means a lot for all of us. On my last trip to Detroit, I asked a cab driver on the way to the airport what made Detroit Detroit. He said, it's just a city that's itself and will always have our season. Here's hoping this harsh season of bankruptcy gives way to better days. And that's my kitchen sink. Thanks so much to our guests for joining us. Scott Wilson, Devontae Yates, Ed Butowski, and William Spriggs. Maybe that beer summit will happen. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Follow me at Nia Wapo and use the hashtag #PostBack. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.